Mr. Webb, we need you to come with us.
Did you look at my boarding pass? Freeze the expansion funding. All of it. Preserve every record tied to that flight. Are you sorry I was removed? Or sorry the person removed could freeze the funding?
B. Two airport security officers stood at the front of the first-class cabin, and the entire forward section of Flight Star Flight 5V02 had gone quiet. Marcus Webb sat in seat 3A, with his hands resting flat on his knees. His boarding pass showed the seat as confirmed. His name was still in the system. Nothing about his ticket had changed, except for one thing. Someone had changed for his seat. Someone had changed the record after a white passenger asked for his seat. B. And now a man in a security uniform was standing over him, asking him to come along. Marcus looked up at the officer. His jaw was tight. His breathing was even. He reached for his bag. That morning had begun 5 hours earlier and 4 miles away. Marcus pulled into the long-term parking structure at Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson before the sun was fully up. He wore dark jeans, a pale blue button-down, a light jacket, and the same leather carry-on he had used for more than a decade. No driver, no escort, no company, lanyard announcing what he did or who he worked for. Webb Capital Partners had a full travel team that could have arranged a first-class suite, a car to the gate, and a welcome committee in Washington. Marcus had declined all of it. Before his company released $4.1 billion to Flightstar Airways, he wanted one ordinary morning on the airline. He wanted to see what the experience looked like from inside it. He moved through the terminal at the pace of everyone else. Rolling suitcases clicked against the polished floor. A child in a stroller waved at nothing in particular. Near the priority entrance, an elderly man in a tan windbreaker stepped to one side, and a folder of medical records slid out from under his arm. Pages scattered across the floor in a fan. Marcus crouched without thinking, gathered the loose sheets before a passing suitcase wheel could scatter them further, and handed them back. The man thanked him twice, embarrassed by his own hands. Marcus said something about the floor being faster than both of them. The man smiled. Marcus stood. A few steps away, Catherine Holloway shifted her pearl white tote bag closer against her body. The movement was quick. She said nothing. She did not look at Marcus directly. She did not need to. The adjustment said everything her expression chose not to. Marcus noticed. His jaw tightened a fraction, but he turned toward the gate without changing his pace. His mother's voice came back the way it always did. At moments like this, in expensive places, some people will assume you are there to carry someone else's bags. Let them be wrong without helping them feel right. His boarding pass read Flightstar Flight 502, Seat 3A, First Class confirmed. He had selected that seat when he booked the ticket 26 days earlier. On the same afternoon, he signed the initial term sheet on the investment. By the time Marcus stepped through the gate scanner and walked down the jet bridge, that seat was his in every system Flightstar operated. What happened next would not be a glitch. It would be a choice. He settled into 3A, placed the leather bag in the overhead compartment, and looked out at the runway. The wing was still cold from the overnight air, and frost had collected along its edge in a thin silver line. The morning light hit it and broke apart cleanly. For a few minutes, the cabin felt ordinary. Marcus opened a file he had been reviewing the night before, an internal audit of Flightstar's passenger complaint system. The document tracked response delays, inconsistent case labeling, and dozens of filed complaints that had never reached a human reviewer. Webb Capital's due diligence team had flagged it. Marcus had read it 3 times. One line near the middle was still highlighted from the previous evening. A complaint loses its meaning when the system decides what happened before anyone reads it. He was reading it again when he heard the voice. I think there might be a mix-up. The man who spoke it was Richard Holloway. He was 58, wore a charcoal travel blazer, and checked his watch before he addressed anyone directly. His wife, Catherine, stood behind him with the pearl tote under her arm and her eyes moving between Marcus and the row number above the seat. Richard did not speak to Marcus. He raised two fingers toward the forward galley as if flagging down a server. Patricia Norwood appeared within seconds. Her customer service smile was fully assembled before she knew what she was walking into. Mr. Holloway, good morning. Is everything all right? Richard extended both phones. He had seat 3B. Catherine had 4C. He explained that the system had separated them, that they flew Flightstar regularly, that they typically sat together in this row. Patricia checked both screens, then opened her tablet. Seat 3A showed Marcus Webb confirmed, full first-class fare, no service flag, no upgrade notation. There was no error. There was nothing to interpret. She glanced at Marcus. She glanced at Catherine. Then she said, "Let me see what I can do." Marcus had closed the report but kept his thumb between the pages. Patricia stepped closer and leaned in slightly. "Mr. Webb," she said, "we have another first-class seat available in 7D. Would you be willing to help us keep the Holloways together?" Marcus looked down the aisle. Seat 7D was beside the lavatory. It had no window. The overhead compartment above it was nearly full, and two passengers were still trying to close it. He turned back. Why can't the passenger in 4C simply sit in 4C? Patricia's smile held, but the warmth behind it shifted. They're traveling together. This would only be a small adjustment. Small. The word settled on Marcus with the particular weight of a word that had been used on him before. In hotel lobbies, at conference tables, on aircraft. Small adjustment, small courtesy. Small concession. The word had always been attached to something that was already his. Part of him wanted to move. Part of him remembered every time moving had taught people that asking him first was safe. "I'd like to keep the seat I reserved," he said. His voice was level. His hand stayed flat over the folder. Richard checked his watch. He looked at Patricia with the patience of a man accustomed to being understood eventually. "I'm sure he'll understand once you explain it more carefully." He had spoken as if Marcus were not sitting 2 feet away. Patricia did not correct him. Catherine leaned toward Patricia and lowered her voice, though not far enough. "Was he upgraded at the gate?" Marcus looked at her. "I purchased this seat." Catherine smiled quickly. "I was only asking." But the question had already done its work. It had placed Marcus's right to seat A3 under review, while the Holloway's preference sat above question. Patricia looked at Marcus's worn jacket, his plane bag, then at Richard's membership status on her tablet. She had the correct answer in front of her. She chose to treat it as a problem. "May I see your boarding pass?" Marcus looked at the screen. She was on it. "You already checked it. I need to verify it directly." "It's B." He unlocked his phone and handed it over. Patricia examined it the way a person examines something they hope will eventually say something different. Passenger name, confirmation number, flight status, fare class, E. She scrolled down. She scrolled back up. Seat 3A, first class, paid fare, confirmed. "Do you have identification with you?" Marcus reached for his wallet more slowly than usual. He knew this pattern, the way a person knows a road they have driven in the dark. First the ticket, then the identification, then the question folded inside both of them. "How did you get here?" He handed over his Georgia driver's license. Patricia placed it beside the phone and compared the photograph. Marcus said nothing. He gave her the silence. One final chance to hear what she was doing and stop. She did not stop. Behind Patricia, Simone Fields had been standing near the gay tablet with a meal checklist on her tablet. She had watched the exchange begin with the routine shape of a seating dispute, the kind that resolved itself in 2 minutes when the facts were clear. But the facts had been clear from the start, and it had already taken 7. She opened Marcus's reservation on her own screen. Full first-class fare, booked 26 days earlier, seat selected during purchase, identity verified at the gate, no upgrade request, no payment flag, no service note of any kind, nothing that asked for a second look. She stepped toward Patricia and spoke quietly. "His ticket is fine." Patricia's jaws tightened. I can see that. I'm making sure. Marcus heard her. Making sure of what? B. Patricia returned his phone and license. This is routine verification, sir. Marcus looked around the cabin. Richard had set a large leather briefcase in the aisle while helping Catherine remove her coat. A passenger boarding behind them had to turn sideways to squeeze past. Patricia glanced at Richard. Mr. Holloway, please keep the aisle clear when you can. Richard nodded without moving the briefcase. Patricia did not ask to see his ticket. She did not ask for his identification. She turned her attention back to Marcus. Marcus opened his mouth. The words were there. This is not routine. They caught somewhere between his throat and his teeth. Not from uncertainty, but from the effort of keeping his voice level, enough that no one could write it as hostility. He set a cup of water down carefully on the armrest tray. Will you note that I showed both my boarding pass and my identification? Something shifted in Patricia's expression. The practiced warmth disappeared, replaced by something colder and more calculated. Until that moment, she had handled Marcus as a passenger. She could move. Now she understood she was dealing with someone who intended to have a record. There's no need to make this formal, she said. I'm asking you to document what happened. Richard placed his hand briefly on Patricia's elbow and steered her a few steps toward the galley. He kept his voice low, but Marcus caught the shape of it. Catherine was becoming anxious. They had flown Flightstar for years. If the airline could not manage a basic seating matter for loyal members, they would reach out to corporate leadership directly. Patricia nodded, then stepped away to make a call. Brent Lawson, his name was Raymond Garrett, a man of 58, who had been working ground operations at Hartsfield Jackson for 11 years and was now thinking about one thing, which was getting the aircraft door closed before the departure window expired. Patricia explained the situation in the compressed shorthand of airline staff who understood one another without full sentences. Top tier member, seating adjustment needed, passenger in 3A not cooperating. Raymond pulled up the reservation. He saw Marcus's confirmed assignment. He saw Richard's membership level. He also understood that if he rejected the request, Patricia would call him again, and if he approved it, he could close this out in under 2 minutes and move on to the next problem. He opened the seat modification panel and selected a code labeled Member Recovery Review. The code existed for genuine booking errors and service failures involving high-status travelers. It did not exist to override a valid confirmed seat because another passenger preferred it. A warning appeared on Raymond's screen. Seat occupied by confirmed passenger. Manual override requires operational justification. Raymond dismissed it. A second warning appeared. Raymond dismissed that one too. Seat 3A changed from confirmed to seat review. On Simone's tablet, the small green indicator beside Marcus' name shifted to amber. She checked the timestamp. The change had been entered 8 minutes after Marcus boarded. Her stomach dropped. She pressed her phone's camera button and captured the screen before the timestamp could scroll out of view. Then opened her email drafts and attached the image to an unsent message before putting the phone face down in her uniform pocket. She did not know yet who the safe person to send it to was. She only knew she was not to let the moment disappear as if it had not happened. Patricia returned to the row. The system is currently reviewing your seat. Assignment. Marcus raised his own phone. The Flightstar app still displayed 3A as confirmed. The status had not changed on his end. Who changed it? Patricia glanced at her tablet. Then, toward the galley, she did not answer. Across the aisle, Beverly Carson had put her magazine down several minutes ago and had her phone positioned low against the seat back in front of her, angled through the gap between the headrests. She had spent enough years in courtrooms to know when a record was being shaped before the facts were settled. She kept the camera steady and said nothing. Richard stood with his arms crossed. Catherine straightened in her temporary seat across the aisle. The cabin had gone still in a particular way. Cabins go still when everyone has decided to watch without looking like they are watching. Patricia positioned herself over Marcus again. Mr. Webb, seat 7D, is still available. B. We can relocate your bag and have you settled in less than a minute. Marcus looked at her. B. Can you give me the reason for the seat change in writing? There's no need for paperwork. We're offering an equivalent first-class seat. It is an equivalent. And my seat was confirmed until someone changed the record. Richard exhaled this into illegal and checked his watch. Marcus turned toward him for the first time since the argument began. I want to know why my seat, Cactate began. Why my side it changed after you requested it. B. Richard's face tightened. I didn't ask for anything that belonged to you. I asked the airline to take care of their longtime customers. He put a slight weight on the last two words, as though loyalty to an airline conferred a claim stronger than a confirmed boarding pass. Catherine adjusted the strap of her tote. There are certain ways people are expected to conduct themselves in this cabin. Beverly's voice came from across the aisle, quiet but clear. B. What behavior are you referring to? Catherine looked across, surprised. Her expression hardened when she registered who had spoken, and the phone still in Beverly's hand. I was not speaking to you. I know, Beverly said. B. I'm asking what he's done. Patricia stepped between them. Mr. Webb, I need you to lower your voice. Richard had been the loudest voice in the cabin. Marcus had not moved from his seat. He studied Patricia for several seconds, giving her time to hear her own words. Is my voice louder than Mr. Holloway's? Patricia did not answer. She unlocked the notes field on her tablet and typed with her thumb. Beverly zoomed in from across the aisle and caught part of the sentence. Passenger becoming resistant to reasonable accommodation. The clean, official language was doing something precise and damaging. It was taking Linda's suspicion, Richard's pressure, the double identity seat check, and the manual seat change, and folding them all into a single phrase that made Marcus's request for an explanation look like the problem. Simone saw the note from the edge of the galley. She said quietly, he hasn't refused a safety instruction. Patricia turned her head. Come with me. She led Simone behind the galley divider and let the curtain fall behind them. When she spoke, her voice was low and flat. You are still under performance review. Do not insert yourself into something outside your assignment. Simone's stomach pulled tight. One poor evaluation could affect her seniority, her route preferences, her future on the crew. She nodded, but her right hand moved to the pocket where her phone was resting, still face down, still holding the screenshot with the timestamp that showed a safe person to send that to when. But she had no safe to send it to yet. But she had not deleted it either. Back in row 3, Marcus turned toward Catherine. She reached for her tote immediately, drawing the strap further under her arm. The motion was less than a second. It still reached him. He had watched his father walk into a department store after an overnight engineering shift, still wearing a company jacket with his name stitched above the chest pocket, and Ollie fought from aisle to aisle by a loss prevention employee who never spoke to him. His father had laughed about it afterward in the parking lot, the kind of laugh you used to keep something smaller. When he tried to unlock the car, his hand shook against the door handle for a moment before it steadied. Marcus had never forgotten that hand. Now, he placed both of his palms flat on his own knees and kept them there. Beverly was still recording. Marcus did not resent the camera. It was capturing something he could feel accumulating in the space around him. The particular work required to remain composed while every calm question he asked was being translated, word by word, into something that looked like a threat. He had been quiet, and precise. He had shown his ticket, shown his identification, asked for documentation, and requested that his name be attached to an explanation. Each of those things had been treated as escalation. None of the same standards had touched Richard or Catherine. Patricia returned from the galley and positioned herself over him again. This can still be resolved very easily. Marcus raised his eyes, then restored the seat. Her mouth tightened. Behind her, Simone stood at the edge of the galley and looked down at the tablet, where the altered timestamp was still visible. She had saved the evidence. The question now was whether she would ever attach her name to it. Captain Douglas Reed stepped out of the cockpit with one hand resting near his radio. Patricia reached him before he made it to row 3. Her summary was brief and took less than 90 seconds. A passenger had declined a seating adjustment. He had questioned crew members repeatedly, made other travelers uncomfortable, and the flight was now at risk of missing its departure slot. Reed listened while his attention moved between her face and the clock mounted above the cabin door. He did not ask Simone what she had observed from the galley. He did not check the timestamp on the seat status change. He did not ask Raymond Garrett why a confirmed seat had been flagged for review. By the time he entered the passenger cabin, the problem had already been named for him. Richard stood when he saw the captain's uniform. "Captain, I appreciate you stepping in." Reed looked at him and Catherine with a brief, professional expression. "Are you and your wife all right?" Richard said they were fine, but that the situation had gone on long enough. Reed nodded, then turned to Marcus. Marcus noticed the sequence. The people requesting his seat had been treated as the people who require protection. He drew a slow breath and said, "I need you to check the time the seat status was changed." Reed glanced at Patricia. "The issue is no longer limited to the seat assignment. My crew has made a request and I need your cooperation." Beverly spoke from across the aisle without lifting her voice. The cooperation issue started after he asked to see the record. Reed raised one hand. "Ma'am, please let the crew." "They're handling it on camera," Beverly replied. Her voice carried without effort. She had spent 4 decades in courtrooms and had not needed volume to make a point since 1992. Patricia's mouth drew into a thin line. Reed faced Marcus again. "Will you accept seat 7D?" Marcus looked at the captain and then at the tablet in Patricia's hands. "I had a valid ticket for 3A. I showed my boarding pass." "I showed my identification. The seat changed after Mr. Holloway requested it. No one has identified a safety concern." He said each of those things as a separate statement, evenly, without inflection, not as an argument. As a record, Reed heard all of it. His eyes moved to the watch on his wrist. Ground operations had already radioed once about the departure window. He could see 2 paths. One involved pull the seat change record and asking who had authorized a manual override on an occupied confirmed sinking seat. The other involved removing the passenger who was raising questions about it. The first path took time he did not have. The second took 90 seconds. "Step into the jet bridge with me," Reed said. "We can speak privately." Marcus went very still. "If I step through the door, will I be allowed back onto the aircraft?" Reed paused. A pause that lasted too long. "That depends on how the conversation goes." Marcus understood the geometry of what was being offered. If he stood up and walked out, Patricia could log it as voluntary departure. If he objected it in the jet bridge, any description of his behavior could be written as confirmation of the original concern. The door was not an invitation to speak. It was a way to make the removal look like a decision Marcus had anticipated it in. He stayed seated for a long moment. His jaw was tight now, and the effort of controlling it showed in his face. "You've already decided you want me to stand up on my own, so the incident report reads cleaner." Color rose along Reed's neck. Richard leaned forward. "That's exactly the attitude we have been dealing with." Patricia opened the incident notes on her tablet and added a line. "Simone's challenging captain's authority." Simone saw the words appear from where she was standing. She also saw Marcus's hands resting flat against his knees. They had not moved. Richard looked at Reed with the expression of a man who believed they understood one another. "People who travel at this level know that you sometimes have to be flexible," he said. He meant it as a statement of common sense. He seemed unaware that it required Marcus to absorb the implication that sitting in a seat he had purchased was somehow inflexible. Marcus turned toward him one more time. The strain was visible now, not in his voice, which remained even, but in his face. I follow every rule. You still need me to prove that I belong here. Richard looked away. Catherine adjusted the strap of her tote. Reed reached for the interphone panel and pressed the ground operations button. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the silent cabin. Ground security to the aircraft. First class cabin. Passenger removal. E. Simone looked down at the screenshot, still saved in her email draft. The crew had created a situation, written it into a record, and called for security to respond to the record they had created. E. She was standing in the middle of it and had not been asked a single question. Craig Fowler entered the first-class cabin with a second security officer behind him. The radio call he had received was brief. E. Passenger refusing crew instruction, first-class cabin, seat dispute. E. No mention of a boarding pass. No mention of a reservation change. No mention of 2 system warnings that had been dismissed by a ground operations employee 8 minutes after Marcus had boarded without incident. E. Craig walked down the aisle with the posture of a man who believed the important work had already been completed before his arrival. Reed met him at the divider and pointed toward row 3. E. Craig moved past the other rows without a sideways glance. Mr. E. Webb. Craig stopped beside the seat. We need you to come with us. Marcus looked up. Am I being accused of a crime? No. Have I threatened anyone? Craig glanced briefly at Reed. We're responding to the captain's request. Beverly held her phone steady. She did not lower it. Patricia stood with her tablet, pressed against her chest, and her eyes forward. Simone stood at the edge of the galley, with her hands at her sides, and her expression blanking. A person's face goes blank blank. They are holding themselves very carefully in place. Marcus looked at Craig for a long moment. Then he nodded once, reached up, and pulled a leather bag from the overhead compartment. His right hand trembled slightly as he closed his fingers around the strap. He was aware of it. He did not try to hide it. He turned in the narrow aisle, and his shoulder caught the edge of the headrest. The sound it made was small. In the silence of the cabin, it carried. Craig reached toward the bag. Marcus shifted it away and took the weight himself. He stood still until his breathing steadied, counting to 4 without making the count visible. Then he stepped into the aisle and walked toward the front of the aircraft. At the cabin door, he stopped. He's still holding. He did not see the camera Beverly was still holding. He did not know about the screenshot in Simone's email draft. He only saw Simone's face, the conflict in it, the particular tension of a person who knows the true version of something and has not yet decided what to do with what they know. He did not know her name. He spoke to the expression, whatever you saw in here, remember it accurately. Simone lowered her eyes. The aircraft door closed behind him. The jet bridge was cold, and the overhead fluorescents were the flat, colorless kind that made everything look a little flatter than it was. Craig walked beside him. The second officer followed several steps behind. Their shoes made clean sounds on the metal walkway. You could have avoided all of this by accepting the other seat, Craig said. He said it without hostility. He said it the way people state things they believe are obvious. Marcus stopped walking. Did you read my boarding pass before you came onto the plane? Craig's face tightened. He had not. That's not the issue at this point. It was the issue before you arrived. Craig looked toward the terminal. The crew gave an instruction. Marcus studied him. He was not angry at Craig specifically. He was tired of the pattern. Craig was standing inside without knowing it. You accepted their description of what happened without asking what happened. Craig said nothing. He had no answer for that, which meant in some narrow way the answer was already there. At the gate, the 2 officers left Marcus near a row of metal seats. A third officer took down his information, time, name, seat assignment of the events. No one asked for his account of the events. No one asked why he had been in the seat or who had called for the override. The officer thanked him professionally and moved on. Marcus sat down. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see the aircraft. The jet bridge had already pulled back. Ground crew were removing the wheel chocks. The flashing light on the left wing blinked in its slow, patient rhythm. Flight 52 was preparing to move. Travelers moved past behind him with rolling bags and paper coffee cups. Gate announcements filled the air every 90 seconds. The world was operating exactly as it always did, indifferent and continuous, and Marcus Webb was sitting in a row of cold metal seats with a leather bag between his feet and a boarding pass in his hand that the airline's own app still showed as confirmed for seat 3A, first class, Flight Star, Flight 502. His phone vibrated against the armrest. He picked it up. The message was from Charles Monroe. Final approval complete. 4.1 billion ready for release, pending your confirmation. Marcus stared at the screen. The plane below the window turned slowly. He could see the boarding door sealed from the outside, the wing lights steady, the nose wheel beginning to track toward the taxiway. Somewhere inside that aircraft, Richard Holloway was settling into the seat beside the window. Catherine had the seat across the aisle. Patricia was preparing for beverage service. Reed was receiving departure clearance from the tower, and Marcus was sitting here. The anger was keen and clean and specific and completely understandable. That was what frightened him most about it. A decision made from a feeling this justified would be difficult to separate from one made from a feeling it wasn't. He placed the phone on the seat beside him, closed his eyes, and counted his breathing until the shaking in his fingers eased to nothing. A fuel truck crossed the tarmac below the window. The aircraft continued toward the taxiway. Its tail number, clearly when the plane was too far away to read its tail number, it sounded clearly that Marcus pick up the phone and call Charles. Charles answered before the second ring. You're supposed to be in the air. They removed me. Silence, not the silence of surprise. Charles Monroe had worked alongside Marcus for 11 years and had learned to recognize the particular quiet Marcus used when something had gone very wrong, and he was choosing his words before he said them. What happened? I'll explain fully later. For now, freeze the expansion funding. All fleet growth initiatives, lounge development, and customer technology upgrades. Stop everything in those categories. Charles exhaled. All of it? Leave every safety-related payment in place. Maintain coordination systems, live passenger services, everything operationally critical. But stop any money tied to growth or image investments. And Charles, preserve all data connected to Flight 502. Every log, every timestamp, every reservation record. Nothing gets deleted or overwritten. Charles waited a beat, the kind of pause where someone is doing the math on what they just heard. Are you sure you want to do this now? Marcus watched the plane disappear behind a maintenance hangar. No, that's why we preserve the evidence first and make decisions second. We don't move on instinct. Charles understood. He had been in enough rooms with Marcus to know that a restraint was not weakness. It was precision. I'll have legal and compliance on a call in the next 20 minutes. Marcus ended the call and set the phone on his knee. On board Flight 52, Simone Fields felt the engine spool up and stood straighter in the galley. The aircraft began to move with the slow certainty of a thing too heavy to hurry. Across the cabin, Patricia was reviewing the passenger manifest for beverage preferences. Captain Reed had already confirmed with the tower. In row 3, Richard Holloway had the window seat. Catherine was beside him. They were speaking in low voices about something unrelated to what had just happened. When the seatbelt sign chimed, Simone took out her phone under the edge of the galley counter, opened the email draft, and looked at the screenshot one more time. The timestamp was clear. The seat status change had been entered at 7:53. Marcus had boarded at 7:45. He had been in his seat for 8 minutes before someone with a ground operations login altered the record. She was thinking about what Marcus had said at the cabin door. Whatever you saw in here, remember it accurately. She addressed the email. She checked the image attachment. She removed her name from the message body. She verified the timestamp once more. Then she pressed send to Flightstar's internal ethics and compliance reporting line. The moment she did, panic set in. Denise, Patricia would look for it. If they reviewed device activity, they would find the draft. B. She went back to the sent folder, deleted the message, then emptied the trash folder. B. Her hands were cold. She believed that deleting it from her device had pulled it back. It had not. FlightStar's compliance system operated on a separate archive with a server-side copy created the moment a submission arrived. B. The screenshot was already housed in a protected record with a flight number, a timestamp, and an attached image. Simone's deletion changed nothing on the receiving end. She did not know that yet. She returned to the galley, B, straightened her jacket, and began the beverage service, B, as the plane rose through the Atlanta cloud layer. Beverly Carson waited until the aircraft reached cruising altitude before she acted. She was 68 years old, had been a civil litigator for 4 decades, and had spent enough time in depositions to know that eyewitness accounts began degrading the moment people stopped watching. She uploaded the full video to her secure cloud account before touching the editing function. B. Then she selected a 2-minute clip beginning at the moment Patricia asked Marcus for identification after already reviewing his boarding pass on screen. She wrote a caption without adjectives. His airline app still showed seat 3A confirmed. At the time, another passenger requested it. The crew then stated the airline's record had been updated. She did not name Marcus. She did not mention a company or a dollar amount. She posted it. B. Within 4 minutes, other users had screenshotted the clip and shared it to secondary platforms. Within 11 minutes, the original post had been saved more than 2,000 times. Beverly's phone, B, tucked into the seat back pocket in front of her, began to light up with notification pings that she would not see until she landed. At FlightStar Airways headquarters in Charlotte, B, Diana Park was reviewing a routine service quality memo when the first press call arrived. B, a reporter from an aviation industry outlet asked why a passenger holding a confirmed first-class ticket had been removed from a flight. After another traveler requested his seat, Diana put the call on hold, opened the video link the reporter had shared, and watched it once without writing anything down. Then she watched it again. Flight had filed its morning crew report. Patricia Norwood had filed it from the aircraft. B. The document stated that the removed passenger had declined verification, stood in the aisle, causing disruption, pressured crew members, and ignored repeated instructions before security was called. E. Diana placed the report beside her monitor and replayed the footage from the beginning. In the video, Marcus handed over his phone. He handed over his license. He remained seated the entire time. B. Richard's voice rose twice. Patricia called the captain only after Marcus asked who had altered the seat record. B. The captain asked about the Holloway's comfort before he asked Marcus what had occurred. Marcus's hands were visible and flat on his knees in every frame where his lower body appeared on camera. B. Diana paused the video on a frame where Marcus's hands were clearly visible. Then she looked to the line of the crew report that described him as physically disruptive. The two versions did not describe the same event. B. She picked up the phone and called FlightStar's head of operations. B. I need the full reservation log for seat 3A on flight 502 this morning. Every entry, every time, every employee account that touched it, and I need it before noon. The reservation log arrived in Diana Park's inbox at 11:47. She opened it and read it twice before she called anyone. The record showed Marcus Webb's booking, prior seat select tab at the time of purchase, verified at the gate. B. 8 minutes after his boarding scan, a ground operations account belonging to Raymond Garrett had accessed the reservation. A warning had appeared. Seat occupied by confirmed passenger. B. Manual override requires operational justification. Raymond had dismissed it. A second warning had appeared. Raymond had dismissed that one as well. The status of seat 3A changed from confirmed to seat review. B. 4 minutes later, the first behavioral note appeared in the incident record describing passenger resistance. B. The sequence of the timestamps meant that the behavioral notes, the ones Patricia had typed and that now anchored the removal report, had been entered after the seat had already been changed. The record had not changed because of Marcus's behavior. The behavior notes had been written because the record needed to look like it had a reason. Diana set the log beside the paused video on her screen. Then she began drafting a statement. Victor Landis appeared in her office doorway at 12:15 without knocking. He was 61, silver-haired, and moved with the unhurried assurance of a man who has spent 20 years making rooms accommodate him rather than the other way around. Two members of his senior communications team stood several steps behind him in the hall. I've seen the footage, he said. We need to get ahead of this. Diana turned from her screen. I'm working on a statement now. Good. The line is straightforward. The crew responded to a passenger who failed to comply with safety-related instructions. We express regret for any inconvenience to all travelers on board. Diana looked at him. That line isn't supported by the reservation log. The captain made the call. That's the verification. No, that's the decision. The verification is the actual record. She turned her monitor so Landis could see the timestamp sequence on the left side of the screen. The seat change happened 8 minutes after he boarded. The behavior notes were entered 4 minutes after the seat change. The removal followed the notes. The notes didn't precede the problem. They explained it after someone created one. Landis was quiet for a moment. Where did the log come from? Operation Standard Records. Request. He stepped further into the room. What about Skygrid? Web Capital is the controlling shareholder. They've already requested a full technical audit of our reservation system tied to this flight. The room changed in the way rooms change when a name becomes a fact. Victor walked to the window, his back to her. He stood there long enough that Diana counted the seconds without meaning to. Then he turned. Our statement needs to go out before they finish their audit. If we put out a false statement and they have the log, we're not ahead of anything. We're on record. Victor's voice dropped slightly. Your job is to protect this company. Diana picked up both printed versions of the statement from her desk, the one she had written, and the original one Landis had given her. The one I wrote is accurate. The one you gave me is not. I will not put my name on the one that isn't. He looked at her the way people look at problems they have not yet decided how to categorize. Think carefully about what you're choosing here. I've thought about it since 11:47. He left. Diana waited until she heard the elevator doors close at the end of the hall. Then she opened her laptop. She pulled the email. Landis had circulated the previous managers to avoid presenting data that could create what he called to perception racial disparate rating of racial service review in passenger service reviews. She had read it 3 times before, each time hoping the context around it would soften the meaning. It had not. She attached it to a protected submission file along with both versions of the statement, the reservation log, and the personnel file she had quietly requested for the airline's former passenger tennis director. Then she submitted the package through FlightStar's protected board-level reporting channel and called her attorney. She did not go back to her office. Meanwhile, Charles Monroe's assistant had found Sandra Mills through a civil complaint that had been settled 4 years earlier. Sandra had served as FlightStar's director of passenger standards until a departmental restructuring eliminated her position 14 months after she refused to revise an internal racial equity report at the request of Owen Carlisle, who had since been replaced by Landis. Sandra had signed a confidentiality agreement covering proprietary business information. She had not signed away the right to describe public events or retain documents she had been legally entitled to keep. She answered the call from a number she did not recognize while standing in her kitchen in Richmond. When Charles identified himself and named the airline, she turned and looked at the cardboard box on the top shelf above her refrigerator. It had been there through 2 relocations in 1 winter. When she had come very close to throwing it away, B. Have your lawyers call me, she said. That evening, Sandra appeared on a secure video call from her kitchen table. The box was open in front of her. She had cut the tape with a kitchen knife. Inside, training manual, a set of meeting minutes, a complaint summary with categories and outcomes, and a collection of printed emails. None of it looked dramatic. That was what disturbed Marcus most about it. B. The worst damage often survived inside unremarkable folders because no one expected paperwork to hold a wound. Sandra did not begin with the statistics. She opened the first file and described a case. B. A black cardiologist traveling to a medical conference. Boarding pass checked at the gate, at the aircraft door, and again after he had taken his seat in business class. When he asked why a third check was necessary, B. A supervisor logged him as argumentative. The complaint was initially labeled service discrimination. B. 2 weeks later, someone reclassified it as behavioral dispute. The category change meant it would not surface in equity reporting. B. The second case involved a retired teacher whose seat in first class was reassigned without notice. She asked to see the change history. The crew report called her behavior unstable. B. The third involved an older black woman who asked several times where her prescription medication could be stored safely during the flight. The report called her behavior suspicious and unusually persistent. B. Sandra placed the 3 files side by side. They didn't erase the complaints, she said. They changed what the complaints meant. B. Then she turned to the chart she had presented to Flightstar's executive team before her department was dissolved. Black travelers in premium cabins represented approximately 18% of that cabin's population. B. They accounted for nearly 44% of additional identity verification checks. The gap appeared consistently across routes, crew compositions, and airport locations. B. It was too broad, too regular, and too specific to a passenger characteristic to dismiss as random variance or individual behavior. Renata Cole, Marcus's general counsel, leaned forward on her screen. B. What was the executive response to this data? Sandra pulled an email. B. Victor Landis's predecessor had replied in writing that the racial comparison should be removed because it might create what he called a false narrative about the company's values. B. Sandra had told him the numbers were not a narrative. B. He told her her job was to protect the company from misleading conclusions. She declined to revise the report. Within 8 weeks, Flightstar had announced a departmental restructuring that eliminated her position. B. 6 weeks after that, a new manager began performing most of the same functions under a different title. Sandra did not cry. She did not describe herself as heroic. She said simply and precisely, B, that she had stayed quiet for 4 years because she had been afraid of losing the health coverage and retirement benefits she had earned in 12 years of employment. I kept telling myself the documents mattered because I still had them, she said. Her hand rested on the edge of the open box. But evidence in a box doesn't help anyone. Marcus did not offer a response to that. He simply asked whether she would allow their legal team to review the full contents. She looked down at the files for a long moment. Then she said yes. B. In Charlotte, Flightstar's legal team received the preservation notice from Sandra's attorney the following morning. B. Victor Landis was in his office reading it when his assistant entered without knocking and handed him a phone showing a news alert. The video Beverly Carson had posted had accumulated 6 million views overnight. B. The clip that had spread furthest was a 47-second segment showing Patricia asking for Marcus's identification after she had already reviewed his boarding pass on her tablet. B. Commentators had identified the airline from the tail livery in Beverly's footage. B. A reporter from a national broadcast outlet had matched the flight number and filed an inquiry with Flightstar's media desk before 8 in the morning. Victor ordered Laura to B. Victor ordered Diana's department to issue the prepared statement. Diana's desk was empty. Her badge was on the communications director's chair. Her deputy, a 34-year-old who had been with the company for 2 years, He stood in the hallway, looking at the badge and the chair, and understanding that she had just inherited a problem she had not created. Victor called a press conference for 11 o'clock. He stood at a podium in a company conference room that had been arranged to look more formal than it was. Three senior Flight Star executives stood behind him with the been told neutral postures of people who had been told to be visible but not to speak. Victor described what had happened on Flight 502 as an unfortunate service event. He said preliminary internal findings suggested a synchronization issue between Flightstar's passenger facing mobile application and the cabin seat management system, a technical discrepancy that may have produced conflicting display information for the removed passenger. He expressed regret for any disruption to all travelers on board the flight. He did not mention Richard Holloway by name. He did not mention the request for a seat change. He did not mention the two system warnings that Raymond had dismissed. At SkyGrid's Technical Audit Center in Columbus, Claire Nakamura watched the press conference without audio. Claire was 43, quiet in the way engineers are quiet, not reserved exactly, but patient with the systems in the specific way that came from believing that machines left cleaner trails than people. She had been assigned to the Flight Star account by Marcus the morning after the flight. Web Capital held a controlling stake in SkyGrid through a holding company structure, and Marcus had directed Claire's team to preserve and audit every Flight Star reservation record connected to Flight 502 before any routine maintenance cycles could overwrite them. Claire and her team had been working since 5 in the morning. Marcus and Charles stood behind Claire's workstation as she opened the preserved log sequence on the primary monitor. "This is the boarding event," she said. A green line appeared on the timeline display. Marcus Webb. Seat 3A confirmed gate verification complete. Timestamp 7:45. She moved the cursor forward. Here, a second entry at 7:53. Raymond Garrett's employee account accessing the reservation from a ground operations terminal. A warning box appeared in the slog reconstruction, yellow bordered. Seat occupied by confirmed passenger. Manual override requires operational justification. Raymond's account dismissed it. The log showed the dismissal. A second warning appeared in the reconstruction. Raymond's account dismissed it as well. The log showed that too. Seat 3A changed from confirmed to seat review at 7:53 and 41 seconds. Claire moved forward again. The first behavioral note, passenger resistance, appeared in the incident record at 7:57. The note logging challenging captain's authority appeared at 8:19, which was after Reed had entered the cabin. Claire leaned back in her chair. The system didn't change the seat. Raymond Garrett changed it. Then someone added the behavioral notes, so the sequence looked like it had a logical order. She paused. The notes didn't explain the removal. They were written to justify a removal that had already been decided. Marcus watched the timestamps without speaking. His face was still. But Adrian Charles, standing 2 steps behind him, saw Marcus's right hand close around the back of a chair until the knuckles tightened. Print the complete timeline, Marcus said. Include the 2 warnings, the employee account identifiers, the edit history, and the time intervals between each entry. Send certified copies to independent investigators and to our legal team. Send a second set directly to the Flight Star Board's outside counsel. Claire nodded and began the process. No one in the room mentioned revenge. No one talked about press releases or public statements. The data was the point. It was specific, it was documented, and it had come from Flight Star's own system. The company had generated its own undoing before anyone outside the aircraft had asked a single question. That afternoon, Victor Landis received a call from a reporter who had obtained a copy of the SkyGrid timeline. It was not clear how, but legal believed it may have arrived through the board's reporting channel. The reporter read the manual override sequence aloud over the phone and asked whether Victor could explain Which part of the reservation record the company's press statement had been referring to when it described a technical synchronization issue? Victor had no answer prepared for a question that precise. B. He called his general counsel and told him to find out who had submitted the timeline to the board. B. The counsel said it had come through the protected internal reporting channel and that he could not identify the submitter without triggering legal exposure for the company. Victor ended the call. B. He sat at his desk for a long time after that. An hour before the second press conference, a reporter stood up in the briefing room and placed a printed copy of the SkyGrid timeline on the table between her and the podium. B. She read the relevant section aloud and then asked a specific question. B. Your ground operations employee dismissed 2 system warnings that explicitly stated the seat was occupied by a confirmed passenger and that a manual override required operational justification. B. Which portion of that record are you characterizing as a synchronization issue? Victor looked at Flightstar's general counsel, who was seated to his left. His counsel did not move. The room was full of people watching. Cameras were running. A dozen reporters had their pens above their notebooks, waiting. Systems spent his entire employees and processes that absorb questions he phrased him. Would be. For the first time since Flight 502 left Atlanta, there was nothing between him and the record. He had no answer. Simone received the call from Flightstar's compliance office the afternoon after the press conference. She was in her apartment in Atlanta, still in the compression socks she wore on long-haul flights, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea she had forgotten to drink. The compliance officer identified herself by name and department, and said the office had received an anonymous submission related to Flight 502 and needed to speak with crew members who had been on board. Simone said nothing for a moment. Her tea had gone cold. Outside her window, a maintenance truck was moving through the parking lot below, unhurried. Was the submission made from a crew member's device, she asked. The compliance officer said she could not confirm the source. Simone looked at her hands on the table. She thought about Patricia's voice behind the galley curtain. Technology can review device activity, and about the way that warning had been precise enough to work without having to name a punishment. She thought of Marcus of his shoulders when he turned back, the sentence he had left with her. Whatever you saw in here, remember it accurately. I submitted it, Simone said. I can explain what I photographed and why. The compliance officer said she would like to schedule a formal interview and asked whether Simone had legal representation. Simone said she did not, but that she would need it before she spoke further. The call ended. Simone sat for another minute at the table, then called her sister. They found it, she said when her sister picked up. Found what? The screenshot. I tried to delete it, but they already had a copy on their end. Her sister was quiet for a moment. Simone, the video has been on television all day. There were people on that plane who said he never raised his voice. Is that true? Yes. And the report says he was physically disruptive. That's in the report. Is it true? Simone looked toward the window. No. Then you know what part of the record needs correcting. Simone called an employment attorney that evening. She agreed to provide a formal statement and cooperate fully with any independent investigation on 2 conditions. Written legal protection against retaliation and a second party present during all interviews. Both conditions were accepted in writing within 48 hours. Sandra Mills's attorney sent Flightstar a preservation notice the same week, covering every complaint record, employee review, and internal communication she had been party to or produced during her 12 years of employment. The notice triggered a legal hold on those records throughout Flightstar's document management system. Victor Landis ordered his head of human resources to compile a summary of Sandra's performance concerns. The HR director opened the personnel archive and spent 2 hours reading before calling Victor back. Sandra's performance reviews had been positive for 11 consecutive years. The critical language difficult to align, resistant to leadership direction, harmful to team morale, appeared for the first time in the review cycle that began 2 months after she had requested an independent audit of the passenger behavior classification system. Victor told the HR director to focus on the critical reviews. The HR director said she did not think that was something she could do in good conscience. Victor replaced her on the FlightStar internal directory with an acting title that afternoon. In the second week after the flight, Patricia Narwood was contacted by the board's outside assigned investigation team and asked to give a recorded statement. She arrived with a flight signed B. The attorney advised her to limit her answers to direct factual observations. Patricia described the morning as a standard service dispute that had been escalated when a passenger refused a reasonable accommodation. The investigator asked her to define the accommodation. Patricia said the airline had offered an equivalent first-class seat. The investigator placed the seating diagram on the table between them and asked Patricia to explain the equivalence between seat 3A, window seat in the forward cabin, B, overhead compartment directly above, and seat 7D, aisle seat adjacent to the lavatory, overhead compartment, nearly full at the time of the offer, no window access. Patricia did not answer directly. B. The investigator asked her to describe the two system warnings Raymond Garrett had dismissed before changing the seat status. Patricia said she had not been aware of the warnings. B. The investigator produced Raymond's logs showing that Patricia's radio call to ground operations had preceded the override attempt by 90 seconds. B. Raymond was interviewed separately. He said he had been under time pressure and had used the member recovery review code as the fastest available path to what he had been told was a necessary adjustment. He said no one had told him directly that the seat was legally occupied by a confirmed full fare passenger. The investigator read his terminal log to him, including the exact language of the warning he had dismissed twice. B. Raymond said he had read the warning, but believed the override was appropriate given the situation. B. The investigator asked him to identify the operational justification he had documented when he dismissed the second warning. Raymond was quiet for a long time. There was no documented justification. B. The system had required one, and Raymond had bypassed the requirement without entering a reason. Reed's interview was conducted the following day. He said he had relied on Patricia's summary, B, that he had not been provided with any contradicting information from other crew members, and that the departure window had constrained his available response time. B. The investigator asked whether he had checked the time the seat status had changed relative to the time Marcus had boarded. Reed said he had not. The investigator asked whether, in his training and experience, B, a confirmed seat assignment could be overridden during a flight without the knowledge or consent of the ticketed passenger. B. Reed said it could not under standard procedure. The investigator asked him to reconcile that with what had happened on Flight 502. Reed said he could not fully reconcile it. B. Craig Fowler submitted a written statement saying he had responded to a radio call describing a passenger refusing crew direction and had not reviewed the reservation record before entering the aircraft. B. He said he had not known the passenger held a confirmed ticket when he approached the seat. B. He said he understood, in retrospect, that had he reviewed the boarding pass information before responding, the situation might have developed differently. B. The written word might appeared in the middle of that sentence, and several investigators underlined it independently. B. Beverly Carson delivered her full, unedited video file to the investigation team, along with a written timeline of what she had observed, from the moment Marcus boarded until the aircraft door closed. B. Her account of the sequence corresponded exactly to the SkyGrid timestamp reconstruction in every detail. She noted the time of each significant action on her phone during the recording because, B, as she explained in her submission, She had spent 40 years in civil litigation, and old habits were not easily retired. The investigation team compiled all of it: the video, the SkyGrid log, the crew statements, Patricia's behavioral notes, the system warnings, the override record, Sandra's files, Raymond's terminal history, and the sequence of Diana's unreachable desk badge, and sent a summary to the FlightStar board 2 weeks after our flight. The summary was 22 pages. Its conclusion was 4 sentences. The removal of passenger Marcus Webb from FlightStar Flight 502 was not supported by the available evidence of a safety concern. The seat assignment of seat 3A was altered by a ground operations employee through misuse of a procedural code not applicable to the circumstances. Documentation of passenger behavior was entered into the incident record after the seat had already been changed and was inconsistent with physical evidence from multiple independent sources. The pattern of additional verification applied exclusively to this passenger, combined with the confirmation center of similar treatment in historical complaint records provided by former FlightStar director Sandra Mills, indicates a systemic failure that can't be attributed to the conduct of any individual crew member alone. Victor Landis read the summary in his office on a Tuesday morning, and asked his assistant to hold all calls. Gloria Marsh, chair of FlightStar's board of directors, called Marcus that afternoon. The conference room in Columbus held no press, no cameras, and no assistants waiting near the door. Gloria Marsh had flown in from Charlotte with FlightStar's Southside counsel and 2 board representatives. They had arranged for a neutral meeting site on purpose, neither FlightStar's headquarters nor Webb Capital's offices, because both sides understood that where a conversation happens, sends its own signal about who is being accommodated. Marcus arrived with Charles Monroe and Renata Cole, his general counsel. Sandra Mills sat on one side of the table with her attorney. Simone Fields arrived last, accompanied by her employment attorney. She wore her uniform, which had not been required. She had chosen it herself. It was the most precise statement she knew how to make about the fact that she was still a FlightStar employee, and intended to remain one. Marcus placed 4 folders on the table in a line. He did not explain them individually. The people across the table already knew what they were. Gloria began with an apology. She read from a prepared statement, but looked up from it frequently, which Marcus registered. When she finished, she folded the paper and set it aside. The gesture meant something. Marcus let her finish before he spoke. He looked at her directly and asked a simple question. Are you sorry that I was removed from that aircraft? Or sorry that the person removed turned out to be one who could freeze $4.1 billion? Gloria looked at the folders on the table. The room was quiet enough that the ventilation unit above the ceiling was audible. She answered after a moment. Both, she said, and I understand why that answer isn't sufficient. It was not a complete repair, but it was the first accurate sentence Marcus had heard from FlightStar's leadership. And accuracy was more useful to him than the kind of apology that tried to replace what had happened with a better-sounding version of it. Renata Cole opened her notes. The conditions Marcus was presenting were not negotiated in advance. They were presented once. FlightStar could accept them, counter them, or decline them. If they were declined, Webb Capital's legal team would proceed with what they had, which was, as of that morning, a substantial amount. The conditions were specific. Victor Landis would resign from the chief executive position, effective within 5 business days. An independent panel, appointed jointly by the FlightStar board and a civil rights organization with no prior relationship to either party, would conduct a full investigation into the Flight 502 incident and into any complaint records identified by Sandra Mills as potentially misclassified. The findings would be published in accessible language with identifying information for third parties protected under applicable law within 1 year of the investigation's commencement. Every FlightStar employee who had provided evidence or testimony in connection with the investigation, including Simone Fields, Sandra Mills, and Diana Park, B, would receive written protection against any form of retaliation, documented at the board level, with a designated compliance officer assigned to monitor that protection for no less than 3 years. B. Flightstar would formally reopen any prior passenger complaint that remained within the statute of limitations, B, where the original record contained evidence of possible misclassification, consistent with the pattern Drandra had documented. A new passenger rights office, B, reporting directly to the board rather than to operations or communications, would be established within 90 days. B, the office would be staffed by individuals who had not previously held roles in passenger removal or crew oversight. B, going forward, staff at any level could not use passengers' discomfort or crew unease as the sole stated reason for a seat change or a removal without documenting a specific B, observable action that constitute a safety concern. Vague descriptions of atmosphere or attitude would not be sufficient justification. Every manual seat change would require the entering employee to log their name, B, the timestamp, the stated operational reason, and a record of any system warnings generated and whether they were dismissed or observed. B, the log would be reviewed by a supervisor within 48 hours of the change. B, removing a passenger who had presented a valid boarding pass would require sign-off from 2 independent supervisors and a documented rationale before security was contacted, B, except in cases involving an immediate physical safety threat. Flightstar would establish a $40 million fund to support passenger compensation claims, legal assistance for affected travelers, B, and crew and management training in equitable service standards, B. Web Capital would release the $4.1 billion investment in 3 stages. The first stage would be released upon board adoption of the conditions and Victor Landis's formal departure. B. The second stage would follow receipt of the independent investigation panel's first progress report. B. The third stage would be contingent on a satisfactory external audit of the Passenger Rights Office's first 18 months of operations. Renata closed her notes. Gloria Marsh read the full list twice without speaking. B. Then she looked across the table at Marcus. This will change how Flystar operates for years. Marcus looked at Simone, then at Sandra. His voice was quiet. B. The next person through that boarding door should not need to own a company to be believed. Nobody spoke for several seconds. B. Gloria requested an hour to consult privately with the outside counsel and the board representatives in the room. Marcus said that was reasonable and stood. He, Charles, and Renata stepped into the hallway, B, and stood near the windows that looked out over a parking structure and a stretch of gray November sky. Charles asked him whether he thought they would accept. Marcus said he did not know. B. He said it was possible Flightstar's legal team would identify specific language to negotiate on the retaliation for protection timeline or the audit structure. He said he would be willing to discuss mechanics, but not intent. B. Charles asked him how he felt. Marcus considered the question for a moment. B. Like I need to get on a plane, he said. The board took just under 2 hours. Not one. When Gloria returned to the conference room, she said the board had voted to accept the conditions in full. Victor Landis had already been reached by phone. He would submit his formal resignation to the board secretary by end of business. Sandra stopped beside Marcus in the hallway. She did not stop beside Marcus in the hallway. She did not say anything extraordinary. She said she was glad the box had been worth keeping. Marcus thanked her for keeping it. She nodded and walked toward the elevator with her attorney. Simone was the last to leave the room. She paused in the doorway. She still had the screenshot on her phone, the original image, the one she had thought she deleted. The compliance system had returned a copy to her as part of the formal record. She had looked at it several times since it reappeared, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to be certain. She remembered what it had actually shown. A timestamp, a seat number, a status change. 8 minutes of documented history that no one had been able to make disappear. She put her phone in her pocket and walked to the elevator. The investigation took 7 months. The final report was published on a Thursday in the early spring, and it ran to 91 pages with a 12-page plain language summary that Flightstar was required to post on its public website under the terms of the board agreement. The summary used direct sentences and no technical aviation language. It described what had happened to Marcus Webb on Flight 502 with precision and without euphemism. The independent panel's findings were unambiguous. Raymond Garrett had knowingly dismissed 2 system warnings, and misapplied a procedural code designed for booking errors in order to remove a passenger from a confirmed seat at the request of another traveler. The panel found no record of any prior instance in which Raymond had used the member recovery review code in a situation where the affected seat was already occupied by a confirmed ticketed passenger. He had understood what the warnings meant. He had overridden them anyway. Flightstar terminated Raymond's employment within a week of the report's publication. Patricia Norwood lost her position as lead flight attendant and was placed on a 12-month suspension pending completion of a comprehensive training program covering equitable service standards, documentation ethics, and incident reporting integrity. She would be required to pass an independent review panel before returning to any passenger-facing role. The panel that cleared her would have no prior relationship with the crew management chain of command that had employed her. Captain Douglas Reed was suspended from flight duties for 180 days. When the suspension ended, he returned to a co-pilot role while completing a required decision-making and conflict management evaluation, developed in partnership with an outside aviation psychology group. The evaluation focused, it's not a formality, several of its sessions between receiving a briefing and verifying one. The difference, a briefing and verifying. Craig Fowler was reassigned by the Atlanta Airport Authority away from passenger removal incidents, pending a separate internal review that examined the airport's protocols for security responses initiated by crew complaints. The review resulted in a new requirement that airport security personnel access the passenger reservation record before responding to any crew removal request where no immediate physical safety threat had been reported. Richard and Catherine Holloway's Flightstar membership status was terminated. The investigation had found that both of them had given misleading statements to the crew and had applied direct pressure, including an implied threat to contact corporate leadership, in order to obtain the removal of a confirmed seat passenger. The membership terms they had agreed to when joining included a provision against misrepresenting situations to staff in order to obtain preferential treatment. Flightstar's legal team determined the provision applied. Samson Fields remained a flight attendant. She received no promotion. She had not asked for one and would have declined if it had been offered in exchange for her testimony. She joined a working group assembled by Flightstar's newly established Passenger Rights Office to review the language crew members used in incident reports when documenting passenger behavior. The group's first recommendation was that reports include specific observable actions rather than general characterizations of attitude or demeanor, and that adjectives like resistant, aggressive, and threatening require a corresponding physical description, before they could be entered into an official record. Sandra Mills was retained as an independent advisor to the same Passenger Rights Office, a 3-year consulting agreement with no Flightstar operational authority but full access to complaint reclassification data and a direct reporting line to the board chair. She brought the box from her kitchen shelf on the first day and kept it on the floor beside her desk in the consulting office Flightstar provided. She did not think of its contents as trophies. She thought of them as unfinished work. Diana Park returned to the communications field 6 months after resigning at a different company. She declined every interview request that focused on her departure from Flightstar. She gave one written statement to a journalism publication that asked specifically about the ethics of institutional communications, and the statement was 2 paragraphs. It said that a communication professional's primary obligation was accuracy, and that accuracy sometimes requires saying in plain language what the available evidence actually showed. It said nothing else about Flightstar. Victor Landis's resignation was filed on a Wednesday, effective immediately, as had been agreed. He issued a brief statement saying he was proud of the work he had done in his years leading the company and that he wished the airline success in its next chapter. He made no mention of the investigation, the settlement conditions, the $40 million fund, or the passenger who had been sitting in seat 3A on a Tuesday morning in November. Gloria Marsh issued the board's formal statement. It named what had happened without softening language. It described the removal of Marcus Webb as unjustified. It acknowledged that the historical complaint pattern Sandra had documented reflected systemic failures that predated the current leadership team and required systemic responses. It thanked by name Simone Fields, Sandra Mills, and Beverly Carson for their contributions to the record. Beverly Carson, when a reporter called to ask for her response to being named, said she appreciated the acknowledgement, but that the video she had taken was not the reason for the outcome. The reason for the outcome was a man who had been in his assigned seat when he was removed from it, and who had responded with specific factual statements rather than with an emotion anyone could mischaracterize. She said she hoped younger people watching the whole thing understood the difference. Then she sat reporter to have a good evening and returned to whatever she had been doing before the call. 11 months after Flight 502 left Atlanta without him, Marcus Webb returned to Hartsfield-Jackson on a November morning. He wore dark jeans and the same pale blue button-down, and he carried the same leather bag with the worn crease above the handle that had been his for more than a decade. He had no driver, no escort, and no members of his travel team waiting at the curb. At the Flightstar gate, a small notice had been added to the boarding display panel. It stated in plain and specific language that loyalty membership status could not be used to override or modify the confirmed seat assignment of another passenger. The gate agent scanned his boarding pass. She looked up at him with a brief professional smile. "Good morning, Mr. Webb. Seat 3A. He thanked her and walked down the jet bridge. Near the aircraft door, a woman in her late 70s was standing with a heavy rolling bag tilted against her hip and both hands on the handle, working it toward the overhead compartment with the focused determination of someone who had decided not to ask for help and was reconsidering. Marcus stopped. "Would you like a hand with that?" She looked at him. The question had surprised her. She nodded. He lifted the bag into the compartment and closed the door cleanly. "Thank you," she said. "My arms aren't what they used to be. Neither is the compartment latch," he said. She smiled. He walked to row 3 and sat down in 3A. The morning light came through the window and spread across the wing. The frost along its edge caught the early sun and turned silver. He settled back and looked out at the tarmac, where a ground crew was working through their pre-departure checklist with quiet efficiency. No one on the aircraft knew who he was. No one looked up when he passed. The seat beside him was occupied by a man reading a newspaper who nodded once and returned to his page. Marcus opened his briefcase and found a new internal briefing waiting in his folder, a different company, a different quarter, the same kind of work. He began reading. "Some battles do not announce themselves when they arrive. They arrive in ordinary places, at a gate desk, in a boarding, in narrow aisle of a first-class cabin, and they require something that looks like fighting. They require a specific kind of patience. The kind that does not surrender what is true, even when the room is aligned against it. The kind that preserves evidence before it acts on anger, The kind that understands the difference between being believed and being powerful and insists on both. Marcus Webb had been believed eventually, only because the record existed, had taken a screenshot and had not deleted it quickly, and had not deleted it quickly enough. Only because a retired lawyer had held a camera steady through the gap between two headrests. Only because a woman in Richmond had kept a cardboard box through two relocations and one long winter when she had almost let it go. The plane pushed back from the gate with the smooth, patient weight of something ready to be in the air. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to see it. Like this video and subscribe. More stories like this are coming, and they are all about what ordinary courage looks like when the room is watching.